Hello everyone, good afternoon. I'm Ajay Bhagwat, Director of InPods India. I welcome all of you to this second day of the webinar on NAC accreditation and ICT for NAC in achieving academic excellence. So today I'm going to present to you, uh, the ideas behind how technology is going to be helpful to you in implementing the requirements stated in quite a few metrics, key indicators in various criterias of NAC accreditation manual. So this initial part of my presentation to you is about the references from the manual which are relevant for us in today's discussion. And with reference to these references in the manual, I will share with you what technologies could be used in what way. So there is a justification of why software technology platforms can help you achieving some of the requirements stated in the NAC manual. So if you look at the overall quality indicator framework, the short form is QIF. As you know, there are 7 criterions, and these are essentially the quality criterias, and each criteria is divided into the key indicators of the quality. Quality word is hidden everywhere. These are actually the quality criterias, quality key indicators, and quality metrics, which are the elements of the key indicators. So that these are the ways you can measure the quality in either subjectively or objectively. And that is why there are 2 types of metrics that come in picture. One is qualitative, another is quantitative. So I'm going to draw some references to metrics which are uh, related to the use of technology, or related to a lot of data analysis that is required, related to how teachers' performance, students' performance has to be evaluated, and some kind of remedial actions will have to be taken to improve the students' academic performance. And I'm going to bring out some references from the manual. So if you look at the first key indicator, which is related to autonomous and affiliated colleges, uh, for the curricular planning and implementation, it says that the affiliated or constituent colleges have rather limited role in curriculum designing and development. They adopt the curriculum overview provided by the respective universities. Each college operationalizes the curriculum within the overall framework provided in one's own way, depending on its resource potential, institutional goals and concern, and so on. So this is very important, basically, that the institutions will have to use the university's resources as a reference, and then have the customizations done by looking at their own local needs, and kind of implement the curriculum designed by the universities. This process makes each institution's unique and reflects on the concern of the college for quality in the form of values emphasized, sensitivities focused on, and etc. So this is about the implementation of the curriculum designed by the universities. And if you look at the second important aspects of curriculum, criteria 1 is feedback system. So unless and until there is a way to collect the feedback, the analysis of the feedback collected time to time on various aspects is not possible. So this is also one of the requirement of using some kind of technology, ICT, information and communication technology, is a broad term used to designate the use of technology for achieving certain requirements. But ICT is a general term, but it requires various tools and technologies to be used for the purpose of achieving these goals. Now, if you look at criteria 2, teaching, learning, and evaluation, this is the this criteria has the highest weight. It has got 280 points in the framework of 900 points, the part A. And part B anyway is of 100 points, is a separate one. But if you look at the first 900 points, of part A, 280 points are given to criteria 2. So this is the most important criteria to be focused on. It is about the efforts of an institution to serve the students in different background and abilities through effective teaching learning experiences, interactive instructional techniques that engage the students in higher order thinking and investigation. So when it comes to higher order thinking, they are actually referring to Bloom's taxonomy. So it also then it directly refers to the way the questions are designed. Although these are not very clearly mentioned here, but the interpretation of this requires to be done in depth, and you will realize that engaging student in higher order thinking and investigation requires a reformation of evaluation process, and the evaluation process requires to address questions designing with the on the by using the framework of Bloom's taxonomy, or if you want to refer something more closer to health sciences education, you may think about Miller scale, which is being adopted by medical colleges when they are implementing competency-based medical education. So if you want to go closer to what they are doing, then Miller scale will be the right appropriate reference for you to implement the higher order thinkings in the students. Through the next, I'm reading it further. Through the use of interviews, focused group discussions, debates, projects, presentations, experiments, practicum, internship, and application of ICT resources are important considerations. Now, it also probes into adequacy, competence as well as the continuous professional development of the faculty who handle the program of study. The efficiency of the techniques used to continuously evaluate the performance of the teachers and students is also a major concern of this criteria. So there will have to be some kind of framework, methodology, a technique to be used by the institutions to continuously evaluate the performance of the students and teachers, and hence there is a need of a lot of data analysis, which is inherent part of this, and that needs to be taken into account consideration when you are trying to establish an environment in which the teachers will continuously get feedback about the students' performances. The key indicators in this criteria 2 are given here. I'm going to pick the key indicators which are relevant for this discussion. So I'm going to pick the first as 2.3, teaching and learning process. It says that diversity of learners in respect of their background, abilities, and other personal attributes will influence the extent of their learning. The teaching learning modalities of the institution are rendered to be relevant for the learner group. The learner-centered education through appropriate methodologies such as participative learning, experiential learning, and collaborative learning modes facilitate effective learning. Teachers provide a variety of learning experiences, including individual and collaborative learning. Interactive and participatory approaches, if employed, create a feeling of responsibility in learners and makes learning a process of construction of knowledge. Of late, digital resources for learning above become available, and this makes learning more individualized, creative, and dynamic. This is the direct reference to use of some technologies and the platforms to make it more individualized and be able to reach out to students and as their needs, as per their availability of the time and convenience, they should be able to access the learning resources to make the learning individualized. The quality of learning provided in the institution depends largely on teachers' readiness to draw upon such recently available technology support, and also um, the initiative to develop such learning resources to enrich the teaching learning. On teachers' familiarity with learning management systems, LMSs, other e-resources available, and how to meaningfully incorporate them in one scheme of teaching learning. So this is also suggested by NAAC that use of learning management systems is kind of recommended to create this individualized experience of learning at the student's end. The next key indicator is evaluation process and reforms. This key indicator looks at issues related to assessment of teaching learning and evaluative processes and reforms to increase the efficiency and effectiveness of the system. One of the purposes of evaluation is to provide development inducing feedback. The qualitative dimension of the evaluation is in its use for enhancing the competence of the students. Innovative evaluation process is to gauge the knowledge and skills acquired at various levels of programs. Now, this requires obviously some kind of continuous analysis of the student performances to be able to gauge the knowledge and skill required at various levels of the knowledge to close the gap that is continuously being analyzed and observed, and then the appropriate remedial actions are being planned continuously. So these are the kind of reforms are expected here, and the reference point to identify the gaps in teaching learning are to be these gaps are referred from are kind of identified with respect to the framework defined by the university, which is about the program outcomes and the course level outcomes. And this is defining these POs and the COs is the responsibility of the affiliating university, and for each course and in each program is Ayurveda, the graduation is a program, and courses are the subjects taught in each term of this program, and program outcomes are the ultimate program level, I mean Ayurveda graduation level outcomes, which are nothing but characteristics to be achieved by the students, and the course outcomes are the subject level course outcomes. Tomorrow we are going to discuss this in depth to understand what are POs and the COs, and sensitization of what POs and COs are, how they have to be analyzed by each teacher for their respective subject is going to be an essential part of teaching learning here onwards, and that is exactly is expected here in evaluation process and reforms. And these reforms are focused on how the educational process is measuring the outcomes, analyzing the outcomes, identifying, using this data for identifying the weaker students, weaker areas of their learning, and then planning of remedial action to continuously improve the performance of the students. And that is the reform expected here by NAAC. The next the key indicator in the second criteria is student performance and learning outcomes. The real test of the extent to which the teaching learning has been effective in higher educational institution is reflected in the student performance in the examinations. Student performance is seen as realization of learning outcomes, which are specifications of what a student should be able to capable of doing on successful completion of a course and or a program. This is what exactly we were discussing a little while ago with respect to earlier slide, and this is actually captured very well, precisely in 2.6. How what is expected here when you see the outcomes-based education framework designed by the university for your undergraduate program. The institutions will have to kind of understand what this is all about, how it applies to them, how each individual in the institution is sensitized, trained, and made aware of what outcomes have to be achieved by the student at the end of each course and at the end of overall program. How these outcomes are being observed, measured, and analyzed from the perspective of whether there are any correlations observed, whether there are any common problems observed in the teach students learning, and then plan some remedial actions based on the analysis of outcomes. So this also requires some analysis, data, capturing data, analyzing it, and naturally you will require technology to handle this part of analysis. So these are the expectations set by the NAAC in their manual, and these are the quality reforms expected as a part of implementation of NAAC accreditation. So what I am trying to communicate here is that the data that you are going to collect and present to the NAAC for the purpose of NAAC accreditation is is to be collected as per the NAAC manual. But however, the way from where the data would come into your report. So this data has to be collected by applying some measures, which could be certain technologies, or it could be when it comes to outcomes-based education, every individual in the organization will have to be trained on it and then sensitized on about the aspects of outcomes-based education. What is the philosophy? What is expected here? And based on that, appropriate measures have to be taken at the institution level, without which the data cannot be presented, because otherwise it will just a hollow claim of that these are the practices implemented. But actually, if those practices are not there, fully implemented, it will be half-hearted implementation of this. It is obviously not expected that overnight these things will happen. It will take a lot of time, but definite and steps taken towards implementation of a sound approach of that is expected by NAAC, which is communicated here through these various criteria and key indicators, will not be will not go in the right direction unless and until there is enough thinking is done about how it should be implemented. I'm now going to go to the criteria 5, student support and progression. There are 4 key indicators here, but I'm going to refer here 5.2, student progression. And this is about the institution's concern for student progression to higher studies and or to employment in a pertinent issue. To identify the reasons for poor attainment. So unfortunately, this is not very clearly written here, but it is about the outcomes attainment, and plan and implement remedial measures. sustainable good practices which effectively support the students, facilitate optimal progression. The institutional provisions facilitate vertical movement of students from one level of education to the next higher level or towards gainful employment. Student qualifying for the state, national, international level exams or competition should be identified by HIs. So how will you achieve this, right? How will you identify the poor attainment? What is mean by poor attainment? How to plan and implement remedial actions is what is to be addressed by sound implementation of the outcomes based education process. And we are going to discuss about this OBE process expected in higher education institutions in tomorrow's session. So now coming to uh, the use of technology to achieve these various requirements stated in these key indicators and the criteria which I just shared with all of you. I'm going to share my ideas and show some of the technologies, how others are using it in not only in the field of higher education institutions, but also in the other fields of domains of higher education, such as engineering, management, or liberal arts. How are they using art, science, commerce colleges? How are they using it? Even within the health sciences domain, how medical colleges, MBBS programs are adopting competency-based medical education. And what is the scope and complexity involved into this? I can share quite a few insights with you through my presentations of technology platforms. Now, in the remaining time today, as well as in tomorrow's session, before I go to that, I would love to address questions, if any. Dr. Gewal also has joined Dr. Manjit Singh ji, who presented his ideas, thoughts yesterday. He's also part of this. So, Dr. Manjit Singh ji, if you have any thoughts to share on this, please do so.
No, not at the moment. Not at the moment. And as we proceed on, in case there are any queries, I'm willing to answer and honored to reply to any of those.
Thank you, sir. Uh, so let me quickly take a look at the YouTube channel, whether there are any questions there. There is a question by Dr. Wagh. Are there baseline POs and COs given by NAC or CCIM? So actually, let me pull out. Dr. Manjit Singh ji, would you like to address this question?
Yeah, NAC doesn't specify what are the POs and COs. These are done by the normally your university curriculum, and they have been defined by UGC and AICT or your statutory bodies. So these COs and POs are defined program wise, and they're specific to certain programs, certain type of institutions. But NAC per se does not have any particular limiting COs and POs. He says, whatever are your COs and POs, have you been able to attain them? First of all, have you defined those COs, POs right in the beginning in your mission, in your vision, in your program, this thing, and especially program educational outcomes or program specific outcomes? And then, is your curriculum aligned with that? And then ultimately, do you have a system where you can how you can measure it, how you can assess the students whether they are slow learners, they are fast learners? And then also they also look out for those parameters that how have is the slow learners, how have you, what have you done, or how have you actioned that particular plan where remedial measures have been taken and put them in the back in the normal channel. And also, those who are fast learners, have you given them some kind of extra help so that they can keep progressing at that their speed and really become stalwarts in that particular field? So it all depends upon your basic intrinsic activities, right, which you are going to show to NAC that yes, this is what we are doing for the fast learners, and this is what we are doing to the slow learners, and this is our average one, the average learners who are whosoever are there, and what are we doing for them also. So that is what is specified. Not NAC does not have POs and COs of its own.
Yes. So actually, this if designing the program outcomes and the course outcomes is the responsibility of the affiliating university, and if the institution it's itself is a part of a private university, then obviously it's a responsibility of the private university to define it. I'm going to read other questions Dr. Anuja is asking, can you guide regarding differences between the interdepartmental, interdisciplinary courses and also add-on courses and value-added courses? What guidance is expected here? I did not get.
See, probably what Sanuja means is that, add-on courses versus what are the interdisciplinary courses. Interdisciplinary courses or this thing specific courses could be that, let's say you are doing anatomy, and then you go into other parameters of this thing. Maybe a particular person who's into ophthalmology, right? Especially at the postgraduate level, do you have some kind of other looking at other aspects also of this thing? So that would be interdisciplinary, and so add-on is that within your own stream of specialization, what are you going to do? Syllabus is one thing which is defined by the university. Very good, but then are you having some additional thing which is specific to your profession, of course, and also adding to certain values to the thing. Let us say, while doing Ayurveda medicine, if you are doing a computer course, also computer, maybe MS Office, maybe Excel, maybe MS Word, which gives you more of data handling or data crunching. So that is the kind of thing which is adding to your normal professional competency. So this is probably what is meant, that add-on course. And then there are certain specific courses which are defined in the curriculum, but then these add-on courses are not defined in the curriculum, that each institute is thinking in its own self. Let us say some institution which is in the rural area, is in the forest area, they have a local kind of traditional medicine which is given as an add-on course, which could be given as an add-on course, so that the two things happen in that particular place. One is you have got added value to the students, that they are taking the traditional value medicine to anywhere wherever they go. The second thing is that you are helping development or guarding whatever traditional medicine was on in India is continuing. Okay.
So I would like to also add, thank you, Dr. Manjit Singh ji. I would like to add something here, which is also already being implemented in MBBS institutions, medical colleges. They're calling it something like horizontal and vertical integrations. And probably that is what is expected here in interdepartmental and interdisciplinary courses. So there may not be a full course that could be called as interdepartmental or interdisciplinary. There could be some small elements or topics or concepts to be that could be called as interdepartmental. And if naturally certain departments will have to, if you want to give early clinical exposure to the students, right, in their first or second year itself, then probably whenever certain, if anatomy is being taught at that time, if there are certain aspects to be communicated by somebody from, let's say, surgery department, at that time of anatomy is being taught, then that is called as vertical integration. Likewise, if temporal integration is expected at that time, within the same term, if the interdisciplinary topics will have to be covered, then it could be called as horizontal integration at that point in time. So I think that could be one way of looking at it, rather than thinking about the whole course to be interdisciplinary or interdepartmental. Does that make sense, Dr. Anuja? By the time she responds, I'll read the next comment here, and we'll try to address that. It is by Dr. Ratna Gadgil. It is introducing this data recording. Won't it consume more time of the teachers, and actual teaching may get hampered? Dr. Manjit Singh ji?
You see, records are maintained everywhere, but this particular data which is there, it does need not be put up by the faculty. It can be at by any of those data entry operators. But question is that the data entry operator will not know what kind of data, what quality of data is to be uploaded. So which is a part of the faculty, that which all data is required. Let us say you have got certain data where the students from local community, or patients from OPDs are attending OPDs, and you have got patient indoor patients also, right? So record of them coming to any particular place, that is recorded. Maybe a register is kept, but that register has to be located from somewhere. Either whether it is computerized, digitized, or else it is in the still in the register form. And then if it is in the hard copy form, maybe certain scan copies are to be uploaded there, which is not the work of the faculty, but certain data entry operators who could be expert on this. They could be employed by IQAC, and they could operate on. So that relieves the pressure on this thing. And faculty is meant for teaching, so they continue with their teaching assignment. I hope that satisfies Dr. Gadgil.
Right. She responded as okay. So there is one more interesting question here. Uh, how do we assess teachers? This is asked by Dr. Gauri.
How do you assess people?
Teachers.
Teacher.
Yes. This
Very,
is
very tricky question. Very uh, pertinent though, but very tricky. How to assess a teacher? See, I don't know. I mean, each profession has got its own way of assessment of the teacher. One is that your assessment of outcomes of your students is one part of it, right? And then ultimately, the new NEP 2020 is also picking up on the total holistic development of a student, and that how much can you help in human values, especially applied to medical profession, those human values and normal life skills, they are equally important. But at the same time, I it is not within anybody's view that how to assess a teacher. Each teacher must assess himself or herself in the first place. And certain teachers, where students really swarm on to learn, that is right success of a teacher. And ultimately what the students have been able to attain by means of POCOs also, but by means of outcomes in the sense, as you mentioned, that student support for placement, student support for higher education, student support in international forum, and certain research works. So that could be the assessment of a teacher. But otherwise, there are no clear yardsticks whereby you can say this fellow is a good teacher and this fellow is not a good teacher. It is all relative assessment.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, there are no more questions as of now. So I'll continue my presentation unless there are. So Sushil will actually help us coordinate with the questions being asked on the YouTube channel, and we can address
Sure,
those.
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm on.
The dignitaries present here, do you have any questions? Or should we go ahead? Okay. Yeah. So I'm going to show you use of technology for the purpose of handling the NAC accreditation process, which could be useful for you to understand how typically various technologies can help you achieve certain aspects of NAC accreditation. So the concern raised by one fellow teacher about the time to be invested in collecting the data is valid, and hence that is exactly what is being addressed here by us, and how technology will uh, help you minimize this investment of the time in this activity of data collection is being the core point to be considered here. So it is definite that certain reforms that are expected to happen as per the NAC manual have to happen. Those will have to be undertaken, and that is the now the reformation that has to that in every institutions will go through in the time to come. And naturally this readjustment and repositioning of the overall environment of teaching, learning, evaluation as well as accreditation will have to be done with the help of technology platforms, so that it is uh, you can continue to save the time, make the day-to-day work more efficient and still effective with the help of technology. And that is precisely is the point of discussion and presentation now here onwards. I'm going to reshare my screen.
Sir, slides are not visible to me.
Yeah, I'm about to share the slides now. Are they visible?
No, no, sir. Slides are not visible to me.
Others are able to see my slides?
Yes, yes, sir. We are
Yeah.
able to see your slides.
Yes, I just shared it, so probably it might take some time to at your end. If the internet bandwidth is low, it might take a little time. I hope that it is now visible to you, sir. So the potential challenge, those who are going to go through their first cycle of accreditation now, obviously will have a challenge of tracing the data of last 5 years, right? So I think each Ayurved college typically has 14 departments, and if you have actually post-graduation programs also, then obviously you'll have a couple of more departments, if I'm not mistaken. So if you are there are 109 metrics for which the data has to be collected by each department. So you can imagine that the kind of variation it may create in the data collection process. So it is as simple as, you know, a 14 multiplied by 109 kind of variations it may generate. And this has to be handled by the team of IQAC office. IQAC is internal quality assurance cell, and it has to have representation from all the departments, and there has to be overall IQAC coordinator and the chairman of the team. So they have to uh, address and handle the pressure of this accreditation process. And naturally, we require them to be supported properly by all the departments, and kind of help them generate their response to the NAC manual as per the NAC manual. So what happens is that if you just take the example of one metric for which the data has to be collected by all the departments individually, independently, and then this data has to be sent to IQVC office from the respective departments, and they have to actually collate it at their end, and then there would be 14 different inputs coming to them for each metric, and they have to consolidate those, form a kind of response of the institution, and then keep it ready and in the evaluated and final approved state for then at the time of uploading the data to the NAC portal. They have to collect the data for each metric in this fashion. So it is definitely tedious task. You will have to have a very systematic approach of collecting the data, communicating with each individual in the organization about their role, their responsibility of collecting the data, and achieve this data collection in the kind of appropriate period of time from now onwards, because the deadline of achieving the accreditation is not far away from now. So probably in this month or two, most of the institutions will now begin their activities of getting into the NAC accreditation shoes and start dealing with these challenges here onwards. So the IQVC teams, obviously, they are at the at the center point, and they will be in the oven and in the furnace, and they will feel the heat. Obviously, there is no alternative. Somebody will have to come forward and take this challenge. So this is the typical kind of arrangement of the data collection, and each department has to collect the data, get it internally reviewed, and then send it upwards to the IQVC department. So this will continue to happen for each of the 109 metrics. So there could be situations like, out of 14, 6 departments have sent you the data, remaining departments are working on it, and then some of the departments have not started any data collection as yet. So each metric, the status of data collection in this fashion should be visible very easily to the IQVC team. Everybody must be aware that what is the status of each department, each metric rather, and what is the progress of each department in regards with collecting the data for each metric. This should be easily accessible, this kind of information, and otherwise it is going to be very extremely chaotic. So if you are referring to the collection process of data, you may want to implement some ideas like data collection through technologies like InPods, which helps you establish the clarity of delegation. So here quite a few metrics are kind of are expected to collect some information which may not be with the departments. There could be some purchase related decisions, or some kind of funding, or some kind of accounts level data that is required to be collected, and departments may not have it. So all such metrics could be owned by the IQVC office, and remaining metrics can be given to the departments to worry about. And then departments can then assign who should collect the data, who should review the data. That's a pair of such roles. The people who are playing these two different roles have to be associated with each metric, and then you collect the data for every metric in this fashion, and you get a kind of automatically collated data at accuracy level. So the manual efforts to be taken by them could be eliminated to a large extent. I think there is somebody's mic.
Exposure.
So there is a if you are receiving multiple inputs for every metric, then actually every input received by IQAC team will have to be collated manually if there is no other mechanism to do it. So you take the example of this metric here, 2.3.3. It requires you 3 different inputs. So I mean, you can think about the complexity now to be considered. 14 departments. Each department will have 109 metrics to worry about. So you multiply 14 by 109. But each metric requires at least 2 to 3 different types of inputs to be collected. So you can imagine the kind of canvas, overall canvas of this complexity. So here there is integer input required here, that is variation number 1. Then the supporting documents, variation number 2, and the data sheet, variation number 3. So there are 3 variations within the metric of 2.3.3. So this is what I am talking about. So when you collect the data at department level for each metric like this, it will have a kind of variations like this. So you have to collect the data, merge it for each department, identify which department has sent what data independently also, so that if you want to reject some data, some part of that data for which was sent by, let's say, out of 14 departments, 3 departments data is not meeting the requirement, you have to reject it, and then receive the refreshed data, revised data from them, and then be ready with your kind of final output for every metric. So that's the kind of cycle workflow also could be there. Situations also could be there that you may receive some certain inputs from some external reviewer also, and that person wants you to make some changes, and you should be able to reject the data, get the revised inputs from the departments according to the inputs received. So that's why this becomes extremely complex to collect the data from 14 departments, especially when it comes to Ayurveda colleges. So in the departments, you can collect the data by assigning clearly the role and responsibility of each person, the dates by which they have to collect the data, and then the interface of the system is such that it clearly communicates what data you require to be collected, what supporting documents, what data sheet is to be used to collect the data, and once that is done, they can submit it for the review, which automatically then system finds who the reviewer is for each metric. The communication is done by the system. You don't have to send any message through WhatsApp, Telegram groups, or through the communication or through phone calls. There is no need of handling external communication for following with the people. So system takes care of this kind of communication. If the data has to be rejected, a reason for rejection is given by the author's approvers, and then resubmission can happen. So this is the way very systematically the data can be collected by you, and there is an ability for the system also to estimate the potential grades that you will receive from. I mean, the similar methodology ideas are used here to compute the the grade points and weighted grade points, but there is no reason for you to compare it with what you would finally get. It's just your personalized method of knowing whether there are any hotspots observed by you when certain data for every metric is being collected, and that's the purpose. So here in this case, let's say I'm showing you department 2 has not attained a better grades than other departments here, so that's the hotspot for you. So that's the way the data can be collected. There is a 8th criteria, right? Part B, associated with Ayurvedic colleges. So this is independently implemented here for you to start collecting the data. And then, there are quite a few, so the slicing and the dicing of the data is done and presented to every department, as well as there is a mega dashboard given to IQAC team to understand the progress of data collection. That is a bird's eye view. You can quickly find out the problems, filter the statuses, filter it as per the metric like this, and understand what's happening. Right? Quite a few times you want to know whether the data is submitted, but is it not being reviewed? What is the reason? Is the person on leave, or too much because of some other issues, the bandwidth is not available, due to which the data is not getting reviewed? It is stuck, the progress is stuck. So that's the kind of inputs you can easily get from the dashboards, and you can then get a very valuable input to make progress, which helps you unblock certain issues and make the progress. So that's the purpose of technology. This is the way the technology can help you manage your data collection, because it is not just collecting the data. You require many administrative processes to be in place. Some auxiliary processes related to data collection are also required to kind of create an environment in which very systematically you can collect the data and eliminate many potential human errors, eliminate a lot of unwanted manual efforts that you end up taking just to collate the data manually. Or there could be some unwanted, unproductive work of following with people. That's the kind of frustrating activities are completely eliminated, or to a large extent eliminated, because of the use of technology. So these are the examples and ideas which are already being used. I mean, this technology is being used by quite a few institutions across India for the purpose of NAAC accreditation, to collect the data for SSRs as well as for AQARs. So as you know, your SSR cycle is just a starting point. Every year, the institutions will have to submit annual quality assurance reports, and the framework or the manual for annual quality assurance report is separately written by NAAC. Although it is more or less same as that of SSR manual, but still it is differently kind of published, written, and there are minor variations in the metrics. Only the major difference here is that for SSR you collect last 5 years data. For annual quality assurance report you collect last 1 year's data. But it is like painting the bridge. By the time you finish the painting the bridge, you have to start all over from the starting point, and that's precisely what is expected. Here the data collection has to become part and parcel of the day-to-day work. There is no alternative, and technology can help you keep the traceability of the data. You must be now going through this experience of the difficulties of identifying, tracing the data of last 5 years. Right? People have left the organization. That you don't know where the data would be there, or if the data is there, it is in the different formats and in the hard copies, which you will have to digitize. All such difficulties are going to be faced by the institutions. With some or the other variation, it will be there. This kind of experience, and then, but here onwards, if you want to improve the situation, naturally you have to digitize the data, right, when it is collected. And if you progressively start using the system, then naturally, every year you will have a kind of a new menu bar here, menu being added for you to capture the data of every year's annual quality assurance report, which is called as AQAR. And then whenever you go get into your next cycle of accreditation, then at that time you don't have to run around for the data, because it will be there here in the system itself, and all you have to do is access the previously collected data, combine it, and then present it as SSR, because that's precisely what is expected in the future. So so these are the kind of benefits that you get when you use technology platform like in POTS for your NAAC accreditation. So this is why short presentation to emphasize and sensitize you about how technology helps in certain parts of your NAAC accreditation processes. Tomorrow, obviously, we are going to talk about outcomes-based education, and I have actually shared my thoughts about where in what context outcomes-based education is important, what the references are that we can find in NAAC accreditation manual, which gives us a directive to use outcomes-based education as a framework, as a philosophy to identify the weaker students and plan some remedial actions when you are finding any gaps in their outcomes. So we are going to talk about the program outcomes, course outcomes, how to measure them, how to analyze and identify the weaker students. That's the life cycle we are going to look at tomorrow. I would love to address questions, if any, at this point in time. There is a question by Professor Chinmay Farke. What basic digital skills of teachers does NAAC expect to cover in 2.4.4 teachers trained for development of e-content?
Basically, what they expect is that have you been able to develop certain e-content for something like e-Pathshala, Swayam, all those schemes which are available, right? Has or NPTEL is another one of them, right? Some of them might be technology based, some of them are medicine based, and some are general. So, has your faculty, any of the faculty members, developed any program, any e-content for that kind of organization? If so, then the reference of that particular NPTEL or e-Pathshala or Swayam has to be given. It is also applicable that in case they have got any development for any of the MOOCs, right, which are there, or else have they developed it for their own LMS? So, let's say I have got 29 faculty members, out of which 10 of them have developed certain material which is available on my own website and being taught for I mean, being used for teaching of my students through LMS. So, learning management system within the institute also plays an important part in this, and then people developing it for their own learning management system is also an equally important part of it. So, credit has been given that have you been into certain kind of this advanced digitized media or not? I hope that answers the question.
Yes, let's wait for his response.
Sure.
In the meantime, we can take another question. It is by Professor Minal Lad. What type of e-content basic skills and Ayurveda teachers can learn?
Even Swayam and other organizations, they conduct certain courses on how to present the material of e-learning material onto the website or for learning management system. But at the same time, what material is to be picked up, that is specific to the profession of the teacher. Okay, so any teacher who is on, let's say, Panchkarma, maybe that you can have a small lecture of your own, mind you, not adopted from YouTube or anything straight away, because until unless you have got IPR problems are overcome, you have got copyright. And also that you can have your own videos also uploaded into that, where you can make your lecture as if you're delivering a lecture to unknown audience in the virtual this thing virtual sphere, right? And then teaching them certain skills which you know, and which can be there. Okay, but just adopting it from YouTube is not an e-learning. It is once in a while, if you give particular parameter, a a reference of that YouTube, and then bring in the certain small video or YouTube video, that is also okay. But at least in case you got something of your own, that will be more appreciated in that. And automatically that is it's a question of habit, that even PPTs, some teachers do not take endeavor to make their own PPTs. They rely on more of the websites PPTs to bring in. So it is there. Let us take certain things on the herbal garden. Okay, you have got certain or naturopathy, or any material which in your own laboratory or in your own clinic it is being practiced, and you can take videos or photographs of that, and make it into your PPT. So it becomes from that particular point.
Uh, right. So next question is by Dr. Kiran Mantri. How to develop e-content? I think most of the your previous response, I think, addresses this question. But if you want to add some more, Dr. Gewal.
No, ultimately one has to take help of those people who specialize on this, who make YouTubes and who make videos. But then it is because you have a profession, you have your own knowledge, and that you are going to present it in some other form or the other, right? So it is there that how you do your teaching, that can itself be digitized and put in there. In case you have got special notes, you could display those one by one, or else how you conduct your class, that could also be equally important. It is as good as conducting a virtual class, right?
So I would love to actually share my thoughts here in regards with e-content. So I don't think that it is expected that the teacher would have to learn the skills of kind of creating a video that will match a professional quality of e-content. I don't think that it is really expected when it comes to development of e-content. It is also about curated. This typical word used by educationists when they talk about e-content is the curated content being developed by the teacher. So it's not about the content that they would develop themselves, but it also means that you are aware of nice effective content available on the web freely. There are quite a few free resources available, and then you pick and choose the right resource from this the ocean of free content available on internet, and then present it to the students such a way that they don't have to figure out, run around and find out themselves what is good and what is the right content that they have to learn from for your course. And hence it is teachers responsibility to kind of find all such nice references related to their courses and bring them together. And that is called as curated content, which is partially developed by themselves, and most of it is kind of taken from the web and kind of referred to as a complete bundled package for a course. And that's it, I think, is more important here when you start developing your e-content for each course. And obviously there are quite a few options
bit of
available.
a bit of caution here, right? when we are preparing the curated. One is that, whatever is being brought in, one part, IPR is one aspect of it. The
Hmm.
second one is that, okay, you have played a YouTube, but at the same time, at the end of the YouTube, have you carried out an analysis which the students must share with you? So this is your
Hmm.
own comments, as if you are presenting it in the classroom, and also discussing that why such and such thing was happening, which must be added on. So this is, then it becomes quite original of you. But if you just put it at YouTube, and let me share that students of today are much smarter, and they're aware of all those YouTubes,
Hmm.
right? Like even school children have got to have come to know what exactly are these things. So media has really picked up, but then ultimately somewhere we hesitate to bring in that media, and we hesitate to prepare our e-material. But then it is quite possible, and it should be done. And that is where 244 says so, that okay, at least for your own LMS, have you developed something? So that is ICT again. One more parameter which comes in is how many faculty members use ICT for teaching learning.
Awesome. This is only one last question. Let's, I think, take, and then we can conclude the session. It is by Professor Arun. Is there any standard heads for a department for preparing data?
Standard head, I couldn't follow.
Yeah, even I did not. Yeah, nevertheless, we can follow up on this
See,
question
there
if
are
Dr.
there are this data templates which InPods is providing, and those could be utilized for various purposes. So InPods has got these templates ready, and which could be uh, taken from there and worked on.
Awesome. So
Or
thank you so much. Yes, sorry, please go ahead.
uh, I don't know. There are certain outsourcing things also available. I mean, there are people available who institute can outsource this kind of task and take their advice. Right? So that those
Mhm.
kind of
Yes,
advisors are also available.
right, sir. So thank you, Dr. Kewal. I would now request Dr. Lakshmikant Paimalle, executive member of ATA Maharashtra, to express the vote of thanks. Thank you, sir.
Hello. Thank you, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible.
Sir. Thanks. Thank you. First, thanks to organizing committee for giving me opportunity to present a vote of thanks. I feel privileged to present it. First of all, I would like to express our sincere thanks to today's speaker, Dr. Ajay Bhagwat sir, for your valuable words and guidance for the data management in the process of NAC accreditation. I hope all your points will be add on for our knowledge and usage in the NAC accreditation process. Also, as a crucial part of today's living in COVID pandemic, online learning is the important part of our life. So we got many new techniques and facts about the same in very detailed manner. Thanks once again, thanks sir for being available for us today in spite of your busy schedule. Also, I would like to thank all organizing committee members for organizing a much needed and current topic for the discussion. Thank you. And last but not the least, I would like to pay my thanks to all participants who are participating from various part of the nation, who are patiently listening the presentation on other side of the window. We hope your huge response will be same as today for tomorrow's session. Thank you all. Once again, thanks to all. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you a lot. And I'm Ajay Bhagwat, concluding this session now and kind of closing this session. Thank you so much. Bye bye. Take care. Have a great day ahead.
Thank you, sir. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.